My older sister, Lucy Wheeler, is an extremely sensitive person. She'll burst into tears immediately if her doll is dirty or if a cream puff bursts in advance. In order to maintain peace in the household, my parents will fulfill any of Lucy's wishes endlessly. Since she doesn't like me at all, my parents don't hesitate to kick me back to my grandparents' home in the countryside. Later on, Grandpa and Grandma pass away one after the other, leaving me with no choice but to go home to my parents and Lucy. That's when everyone sets up 3,672 house rules for me to follow. Since Lucy loves blueberries, I'm not allowed to touch any of them. Since Lucy loves dresses, I'm not allowed to look prettier than her. After undergoing 20 years of torment, I end up contracting breast cancer, resulting in my tragic death. When I open my eyes again, I've returned to the first day I've gotten home after my grandparents' passing. Lucy is extremely sensitive, right? Well then, I'd like to see which one's the more superior weapon, her tears or my fists. You'll stay in this room. Mom cleared out the smallest room in the house for me. Before I could even react, tears started pouring down my elder sister's face. No. This room belongs to Bun Bun. Hearing that, Mom rushed over to comfort her. But your sister is home now. She needs somewhere to sleep. But my sister, Lucy Wheeler, was extremely upset. She cried harder. No, no, no. This is Bun Bun's room. Bun Bun won't have a room anymore. Bun Bun was the rabbit plushie in Lucy's arms. Lucy was an extremely sensitive person. Even the smallest change could cause her emotions to spiral. Because of that, she had no friends and couldn't keep pets. Stuffed animals were the most important things in her life. Mom tried comforting her for a while, but it clearly wasn't working. Without hesitation, Mom turned to me and said, "In that case, you can sleep on the couch. You'll be leaving for college soon and moving into a dorm anyway." I responded by charging straight at the highly sensitive Lucy. Before anyone could react, I landed 2 hard slaps across her face. Cry, cry, cry. All you do is cry, huh? Is crying the only thing you're good at? You miserable curse. Why don't you just die? If you die, I'll bury your stupid toy with you, then the 2 of you can be together forever. You want me to sleep on the couch? You psycho. Who do you think? Her crying grew louder and louder. She was sobbing so hard that she looked like she couldn't breathe. The more I watched, the angrier I got. I grabbed her hair and yanked hard. Cry some more. Since you love crying so much, let me help you out. Damn it. If you stop crying, I'll beat you to death. Mom screamed and lunged at me, grabbing me and trying to pull me away. You brat. What are you doing? You're not allowed to hit your sister. I refused to let go. So, Lucy started hitting and scratching me. In response, I bit down hard on Lucy's cheek. The harder she hit me, the harder I bit. The entire house echoed with Lucy's shrill screams and choking cries. No matter what Mom did, she couldn't pull me away. So, she changed tactics. With a face full of helplessness, she pleaded with me. Be good. Lucy doesn't know any better, but you do. She's sick. Stop this nonsense and let go. My response to that was to bite down even harder. In my previous life, everything in this family revolved around the overly sensitive Lucy. At first, it was small things like giving up my room or never competing with her for snacks. Then, I got accepted into college. She cried because she couldn't get into one. So, I was forced to give it up and attend a vocational school instead. When I wanted to work, she cried, envious of how confident and ambitious I looked. So, I ended up staying home to take care of her. Even when I got a boyfriend and wanted to get married, she cried. Every time she cried, my parents forced me to compromise to stop her incessant crying. Eventually, I had turned into an invisible maid in my own home. When I still refused to let go, Mom turned frantic. Finally, she said, "The room is yours. The room is yours." Only then did I finally let go. Honestly, I had bitten so hard that my jaw was aching. Rubbing my face, I watched Mom hold Lucy while they both cried, muttering complaints about me under her breath. I only sneered coldly. She can't control herself because she's mentally unstable. You can't do anything about it. So why keep her here and make everyone miserable? Can't you send her to a psychiatric hospital? As soon as I said that, Lucy cried even harder, huge drops of tears falling from her eyes as she sobbed, "I'm not crazy, Penny." Mom looked heartbroken. She hugged Lucy tightly and comforted her over and over. My baby isn't crazy. She's just sensitive. It's okay. As she spoke, she reached out as if she wanted to hit me. But I caught her wrist and shoved her away. I didn't hit her. Instead, I started maniacally smashing everything in the house while screaming, "If she isn't crazy, then why are you all tiptoeing around her? Why do you get to treat me like this?" In my previous life, I still felt a trace of pity for Lucy. It was not like she wanted to be this way. But in the end, my parents and I were all dragged into mud, turned into fuel for her emotions. I turned and walked into what should have been my room, then suddenly realized something was off. This was the smallest room in the house. There was only a tiny window, and there was practically no sunlight. It was barely livable. Why should I be the one living in a room like that? So, I stormed into my parents' bedroom and threw all their belongings out. "I'm taking your room. I don't want that crappy one." "You can refuse, of course. Then, I'll just make do and share a room with Lucy. After all, hers is the biggest and nicest. It even has a floor-to-ceiling window." I looked at Lucy, tilted my head with a cold smile, and clenched my fists until they cracked. Mom immediately gave in. "Fine, you can take it." That evening, when Dad got home, he was furious. He went into a frenzy, pounding on the door like he'd lost his mind. "Get out here, you little brat. How dare you bully your mother and your sister?" I shoved a wardrobe against the door, put on noise-canceling earphones, and continued going through my assignments indifferently. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was about to leave for school, that I realized the door had been locked from the outside with a chain. My parents hadn't gone to work. They just sat in the living room and told me coldly, "Since you won't listen, we're going to have to teach you a proper lesson." They thought I'd be scared and would beg for mercy. They even said, "Don't you like causing a scene? Don't you like solving problems with violence? Let's see how you solve anything when you're locked in here." I simply closed the door. Then, I started calling everyone, my teachers, my classmates, and my relatives. I said, "My parents locked me in my room. They're trying to starve me. Please, come help me." I had always known what kind of people my parents were. When it came to Lucy, they were gentle and caring. But they were still human. Of course, they had their own emotions. And I, the normal one, was their outlet. Every time I made Lucy cry, they would discipline me in every way imaginable until I learned my lesson and didn't dare make the same mistake again. I used to think they had no choice and that Lucy drove them to do it. But only after I died in my previous life did I hear their desperate complaints. "Why is Penny so weak under pressure? She's completely useless. We were trying to train her properly so that when we're old, she could take care of Lucy. Now, she's gone before us. Everything they did to me was just to mold me into someone who could take care of Lucy when they were old." My relatives were the first to arrive. The moment they saw the chain on the door, they immediately started criticizing my parents. "We're not trying to be harsh, but Lucy is already not well, and now you're abusing Penny too?" Next came my teachers and classmates. My parents were surrounded and bombarded with moral and legal warnings. In front of outsiders, they couldn't even lift their heads. They had no choice but to quickly remove the chain. Even though Lucy was crying nonstop beside them, they didn't have the energy to comfort her. I stepped out of the room, covering my face, looking aggrieved. "Lucy is terrifying. She doesn't sleep at night. She just cries. And Dad acts like a lunatic, always yelling and screaming." With my dramatic retelling, everyone became convinced that I came from a crazy family. Lucy clearly showed signs of mental illness, while my parents weren't emotionally stable either. My parents, who cared deeply about their reputation, were shattered. They didn't dare to leave the house for quite a while. At first, Dad still wanted to hit me, just like in my previous life. But this time, I snapped. I grabbed a chair nearby and swung it straight at him. Maybe I wasn't stronger than a grown man, but I could use tools. The fight ended with chairs and tables completely smashed to pieces. When I hit Dad's arm, he clutched it and glared at me viciously. I leaned my face in closer and said, "Go on. Hit me. If you do, I'll call the police." I went all out, making a scene. And instead, they didn't dare touch me. I even fought with Lucy over clothes, fruit, and anything I could take. She cried from morning to night until her eyes swelled and she had no tears left. Even then, all they could think about was keeping us apart. Finally, Dad took the initiative to say, "You should move into the school dorm. This family can't go on like this anymore." I knew what I had to prioritize. There was no way I could spend my entire life tangled up with someone who was mentally unstable. So, I took the money, packed my things, and moved straight into the school dorm. At last, the endless crying and furious arguments were gone from my ears. My grades improved remarkably. During the interschool mock exam, I even ranked first. Back in my previous life, my grades were at best good enough to barely make it into a vocational school. But in this life, without Lucy dragging me down, who knew I could actually be this capable? But soon, what followed after was Dad cutting off my living expenses. I called him. What's the meaning of this? Did he want me to come back home to cause another scene? But after a moment of silence, he responded, the prize from your exam. I frowned as I listened to him force out the rest of his sentence. Lucy wants it. Give it to her, then I'll transfer your living expenses right away. In the background, I could hear Lucy's pitiful sobbing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I just really like that fountain pen. But it's okay. I don't have to have it. I'm just a little sad. I erupted with rage, hurling every insult I could think of. What does your crazy daughter have to do with me? If she wants to cry, then let her cry. If you can't take it, tape her mouth shut. Why should I care? What does it have to do with me? Leave me alone. I practically went mad as I screamed into the phone. But no matter how much I cursed or vented, it wasn't enough to calm me down. I hated this. Why did they have to drag me down? Why should she have my things? Why couldn't that psycho just die instead of making the entire family suffer? The person on the other end switched to Mom. Unlike Dad, she wasn't forceful. She used tears instead. What can I do? Lucy's already here. We can't just kill her. She really isn't mentally ill. She just can't control her emotions. She's suffering too, you know. I was so furious that I could barely breathe. Beside me, my classmate slid over a note that read, "We won the same prize. Just give her mine." I shook my head. No. If I gave in once, they would only keep coming back for more, and they would drag me down with them. I hung up and ran straight home from school. It had been too long since I had put them in their place. That was why they thought they could push me around again. Besides, they had no shame. But I did. The second I walked through the door, I grabbed Lucy, twisting, scratching, pinching, and hitting her. Mom, who stayed home full-time to care for her, screamed in panic. No. Stop. I ignored her and kept hitting. She's highly sensitive, huh? Well, I've got anger issues. If someone pisses me off, I'll beat them up. If she keeps crying, I'll beat her. I'll beat her to death if I have to. Worst comes to worst, we'll both die. Even after Dad got home and came at me with his belt, I still refused to let go of Lucy's hair. In the end, my parents reluctantly gave in. They transferred all of my tuition fees, living expenses, and dorm fees in one lump sum. They only had one condition: I was never allowed to come home again. I took the money, then blocked every single one of them. Even in the future, I never wanted to set foot in that miserable house again. I thought that would finally free me. But it didn't. Not long afterward, I received the news that my parents had been killed in a car accident. And now, I was Lucy's only legal guardian. The phone call from the police came on a Tuesday afternoon. It was raining heavily, the fat drops drumming against the library window where I was studying. "Is this Penny Wheeler?" The voice on the line was flat, professional, and entirely devoid of warmth. "We are calling to inform you of a fatal traffic accident on Route 9. Your parents, Arthur and Madeline Wheeler, were pronounced dead at the scene. Your sister, Lucy Wheeler, was not in the vehicle. As the next of kin, we need you to come down to the station." I stared at the blinking cursor on my laptop. My first thought wasn't grief. It wasn't shock. It was a cold, calculating assessment of my physical state. My chest didn't hurt. My breathing was deep and clear. In my previous life, around this age, the constant, suffocating stress had already begun to manifest as a dull ache in my breast. The suppressed rage, the endless compromises, the swallowed tears, they had been a slow-acting poison. But in this life, I had vented. I had fought. I had smashed tables, bitten cheeks, and screamed until my throat was raw. My body felt light, strong, and entirely healthy. "I'll be there," I said, and hung up. When I arrived at the police station, the lobby was already a circus. Our extended family, relatives I hadn't seen since my grandparents' funerals, had descended like vultures. There was Aunt Helen, a heavy-set woman who wore her self-righteousness like a coat of armor, and Uncle Raymond, a man whose eyes always lingered a second too long on other people's wallets. And, of course, in the center of them all was Lucy. She was sitting on a plastic chair, clutching that stupid, filthy rabbit plushie, Bun, to her chest. Her eyes were swollen to the size of walnuts. She was shaking, letting out low, wet whimpers that drew sympathetic looks from the officers passing by. Oh, Penny. You're finally here. Aunt Helen gasped, rushing over to grab my shoulders. Her grip was tight, almost accusatory. Where have you been? Your poor sister has been hysterical for hours. She's so sensitive, you know how she is. She can't handle this kind of trauma. I calmly peeled Aunt Helen's fingers off my jacket. I was in class. I came as soon as I was called. Class? Aunt Helen's voice rose a octave, ensuring the entire lobby could hear her. Your parents are dead, Penny. How can you think about school at a time like this? Look at your sister. She's practically drowning in her own tears. As if on cue, Lucy let out a piercing wail. Penny. Mom and Dad are gone. They're gone. What am I going to do? Who's going to take care of me? The noise on the street is too loud, and the lights in here are hurting my eyes. I want to go home. I want Mom. In my past life, this would have been the moment the trap snapped shut. The relatives would have comforted Lucy, looked at me with expectation, and laid out the invisible contract. You are the normal one. You are the strong one. You must drop out of school, take care of Lucy, and sacrifice your life to keep her from crying. But I wasn't the Penny of the past. I walked past Aunt Helen, stood directly in front of Lucy, and looked down at her. Lucy looked up, her tear-streaked face twisting into a familiar expression of fragile helplessness. She reached out her hands, expecting me to pull her into an embrace, to apologize for not being there sooner. Instead, I reached down, grabbed the ears of the rabbit plushie in her arms, and yanked it out of her grip. What are you doing? Lucy shrieked, her voice cracking. Give Bun Bun back. I walked over to the large, industrial trash can near the entrance of the police station and dropped the plushie inside. Then, I turned back to face her, my expression utterly indifferent. You're 20 years old, Lucy, I said, my voice carrying clearly across the quieted room. Our parents are dead. The people who treated you like a fragile glass doll are in the morgue. If you want to cry, do it on your own time. But if you think you're going to use your pathetic tears to lock me into a cage again, you've got another thing coming. Penny. Aunt Helen screamed, horrified. How can you be so heartless? She's your sister. If you care so much, Aunt Helen, you take her, I replied smoothly, turning my gaze to her. She's all yours. You can buy her all the cream puffs she wants. Make sure nobody wears dresses prettier than her, and let her sleep in your master bedroom. Let's see how long your household peace lasts. Aunt Helen choked on her words, her face turning a bright, angry red. She looked at Uncle Raymond, but he suddenly found the tiled floor very interesting and refused to make eye contact. They wanted to play the role of the benevolent, moral guardians, but only if the actual labor and financial burden fell entirely on me. Now, I said, walking toward the officer who had called me. Let's talk about the estate. My parents had died without a will. They were relatively young, and they had spent their entire lives assuming they would outlive Lucy, or at least survive long enough to legally bind me to her care. Because they died intestate, the law was beautifully simple: their estate would be divided equally between their two surviving children. The estate consisted of our family home, a decent 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb, and a life insurance policy worth about $300,000. A week after the funeral, which I attended in silence while Lucy put on a performance of grief that belonged in an opera, the relatives gathered at the family house to help us settle things. In reality, they wanted a piece of the pie. Since Penny is staying in the school dorms and Lucy can't possibly live alone, we think it's best if Lucy stays here, Aunt Helen declared, sipping tea from my mother's favorite porcelain cup. Raymond and I can move in to help look after her. Of course, we'd need to use a portion of the insurance money to cover the household expenses and Lucy's medical needs. Lucy sat beside Aunt Helen, nodding weakly, looking like a victim of a great tragedy. I can't live in a new place. The walls in other houses smell weird. It makes my head hurt. I need to stay here. And I need someone to cook for me. Penny knows how to make the soup I like. I sat on the opposite sofa, flipping through a stack of legal documents my lawyer had prepared. I didn't look up as I spoke. The house is going to be sold. The room went dead silent. Lucy's eyes went wide. What? No. This is my home. You can't sell it. The house is registered in our parents' names, I said, finally looking up and meeting Lucy's eyes. As of their death, 50% of this property belongs to me. I want my 50%. Since neither of us has the cash to buy out the other's share, the only legal solution is to put the house on the market, sell it, and split the proceeds. You greedy little monster. Aunt Helen slammed her teacup down, spilling hot liquid onto the wooden table. All you think about is money. Your sister is mentally fragile. Where is she supposed to go? You want to throw her onto the streets? She has her own 50% of the estate, doesn't she? I replied, my voice cool and rational. With half the house sale and half the insurance money, Lucy will have over $250,000. That is more than enough to buy a small apartment or pay for a long-term care facility. A facility? Lucy shrieked. She jumped up from the sofa, her face contorting in rage and panic. I'm not going to a home for crazy people. I'm not crazy. Penny, you're doing this on purpose. You hate me. You've always hated me. She lunged across the table, her fingernails clawing toward my face. In my past life, would have cowered. I would have tried to shield myself while my parents yelled at me for provoking her. But this time, I didn't even blink. I stood up, caught her wrists midair, and twisted them downward. With a swift, practiced motion, I swept her legs out from under her. Thud. Lucy hit the hardwood floor hard. The breath left her lungs in a sharp gasp. You're right, I whispered, leaning down so only she could hear me. I do hate you. I spent 20 years of another life dying because of your pathetic, selfish tantrums. You think your tears are a weapon? Let me show you what real violence looks like. I let go of her wrists and stepped back, looking at Aunt Helen and Uncle Raymond, who were gaping at me in absolute horror. If anyone has an objection to the sale of the house, you can speak to my lawyer, I said, tossing a business card onto the table. As for Lucy's guardianship, I am 18. Under the law, I am an adult, but I am still a student with no stable income. I am legally incapable of acting as a guardian for an adult with special needs if I choose not to. If she is indeed mentally unstable, as you all claim, I will petition the court to appoint a public guardian to manage her funds and housing. A public guardian? Uncle Raymond muttered, his brow furrowing. He knew what that meant. A court-appointed guardian would control Lucy's money. Not a single cent of that $250,000 would ever find its way into his pocket. Yes, I smiled. And since a public guardian is a state official, they won't care if Lucy cries because her cream puff burst. They will put her in a budget-friendly group home, give her a set schedule, and ignore her tantrums. If she refuses to eat, they'll let her go hungry. If she screams, they'll medicate her. Lucy lay on the floor, staring up at me. For the first time in her life, the tears stopped. She wasn't stupid. She was a master manipulator. She knew that her tears only worked on people who loved her, or people who could be guilt-tripped into submission. But looking at me, she saw nothing. No love, no guilt, no pity. Only a cold, bottomless wall of iron. She realized, with a sudden, sickening clarity, that if she pushed me too far, I would genuinely let her rot. The next few months were a blur of legal battles and administrative paperwork. Aunt Helen, determined to get her hands on Lucy's share of the money, tried to sue for guardianship. She painted herself as the savior of a poor, abused orphan. But I was prepared. I submitted the police reports from the night my parents locked me in my room. I submitted the testimonies of my high school teachers and classmates who had witnessed my family's erratic behavior. I even submitted medical records showing the physical injuries I had sustained during our childhood disagreements. When the judge saw the evidence, he looked at Aunt Helen with deep suspicion. It seems to this court, the judge said, shuffling the papers, that the Wheeler household was a highly volatile environment. Furthermore, Lucy Wheeler is 20 years old and has no formal medical diagnosis of cognitive disability. Being extremely sensitive is not a legal ground for state-mandated dependency. The court ruled that Lucy was a legally competent adult. She did not need a guardian. This was the worst possible outcome for Lucy. It meant she was entirely responsible for herself. She couldn't force me to take care of her, and Aunt Helen couldn't legally access her funds without her signature, and Lucy, paranoid as she was, refused to let anyone touch her money. The house was sold. After taxes and fees, I walked away with $130,000. I immediately bought a small, clean studio apartment near my university and put the rest of the money into a high-yield index fund. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I had a space that was entirely my own. No dirty dolls. No screaming. No locked doors. Meanwhile, Lucy, refusing to live in a cheap apartment, used a significant portion of her money to rent a luxury condo in the city center. She wanted to prove to everyone, especially me, that she could live like a princess without our parents. Aunt Helen and Uncle Raymond, realizing there was no easy cash to be made, quickly distanced themselves. They stopped answering Lucy's calls. They didn't visit. The stage was set, but the audience had vanished. It didn't take long for the cracks to show. Without our mother to wash her clothes, clean her room, and cook her meals, Lucy's luxury condo quickly turned into a gilded dump. She didn't know how to pay utility bills, how to order groceries, or how to deal with the minor inconveniences of daily life. One evening, during my sophomore year, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered. Penny. The voice on the other end was hoarse, trembling, and barely recognizable. Penny, please, the toilet is overflowing. There's water everywhere. And the landlord is yelling at me. He says he's going to evict me because the water is leaking into the apartment below. I don't know what to do. I'm so scared. Please come help me. I'm your sister. I leaned back on my sofa, taking a sip of warm tea. Call a plumber, Lucy, I said. I don't know how, she sobbed, her voice rising into that familiar, grating whine. They're mean to me. The plumber on the phone laughed at me because I didn't know what a main valve was. Why are you being so cruel? I'm crying. Penny. Can't you hear me? I'm literally shaking. Then shake, I said. And when you're done shaking, use your phone to search for a local plumber. You have the money. Pay them. I hate you, she screamed, the fragile act shattering instantly. You stole my life. If you hadn't demanded the house be sold, Mom and Dad's spirits would still be protecting me. You're a curse. I hope you get sick and die. I smiled. Sick and die. In my previous life, I did. But not this time. I'm hanging up now, Lucy. Don't call this number again. If you hang up, I'll kill myself. She threatened, her voice desperate. I'll jump off the balcony. Everyone will know you drove your sensitive, grieving sister to suicide. You'll be a murderer. Go ahead, I said, my voice entirely flat. But make sure you do it quickly. The property value of your building might drop if you linger too long on the pavement, and I'd hate for your estate to lose value before I inherit your half. I hung up. She didn't jump. People like Lucy love themselves far too much to ever actually hurt themselves. Her threats of self-harm were just another set of chains she used to bind the people around her. But when the prisoner refuses to wear the chains, the warden has no power. 2 years passed. I was in my final year of university, maintaining a perfect GPA, and had already accepted a lucrative job offer at a top-tier financial firm. My life was a straight, ascending line of progress. Lucy, on the other hand, had hit rock bottom. The $250,000 she had inherited was gone. Without a job, and with a lifestyle that demanded luxury but produced nothing. She had spent her inheritance on expensive clothes, takeout, and predatory friends, who quickly abandoned her once the cash ran out. She had been evicted from her luxury condo. She had tried to move in with Aunt Helen, but Aunt Helen had literally locked the gate and called the police, citing a domestic disturbance, when Lucy started screaming and smashing flower pots on her porch. Finally, she had nowhere left to turn. One Friday afternoon, as I was walking out of my last lecture, I saw a crowd gathered near the campus plaza. In the center of the plaza, sitting on the steps of the university library, was Lucy. She looked terrible. Her hair was greasy and matted, her expensive designer coat was stained and torn, and she was clutching a dirty, generic stuffed bear she must have found in a thrift store. She was crying, loudly, dramatically, drawing the attention of hundreds of students. My sister. Penny Wheeler, she's a monster. Lucy wailed, rocking back and forth. She took all our parents' money. She left me homeless. I have no food. No place to sleep. She's a brilliant student here, but she's an absolute devil. At home. She beats me. She starves me. The students were whispering, looking around. Some of them had their phones out, recording the scene. In the age of social media, a story like this, a successful, cold-hearted student abusing her vulnerable sister, could ruin a career before it even began. I saw my classmates looking at me, their expressions a mix of shock and suspicion. I didn't run. I didn't hide. I walked straight down the steps, into the center of the plaza, and stood directly in front of Lucy. Penny. Lucy cried out, her eyes shining with a wicked, triumphant light. She thought she had won. She thought that by bringing the fight to my territory, by threatening my reputation, she could finally force me to submit. Please, Penny. Just give me a place to sleep. I'm so hungry. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me on the streets. I stood there, looking down at her. I didn't hit her. I didn't scream. Instead, I took out my phone, connected it to the campus's outdoor Bluetooth speaker, a system the student union used for announcements, which I had access to as a student representative, and opened a video file. It was a compilation. I had spent years keeping records. I had recordings of Lucy's tantrums from our teenage years. I had the video of her throwing a porcelain vase at my head because I bought a dress she liked. I had the audio recording of her threatening to commit suicide to blackmail me. I had the scanned court documents showing that she had received over $250,000 in inheritance and had spent it all in less than 2 years. I pressed play. Lucy's voice, shrill, arrogant, and vicious, blasted through the plaza speakers. If you don't give me your exam prize, I'll tell Dad you hit me. I'll cry until he breaks your fingers. You're just a servant in this house, Penny. You exist to take care of me. If you don't like it, why don't you just die? The crowd went completely silent. The students who had been looking at me with pity and suspicion now stared at the speakers, then at Lucy, their faces twisting in disgust. The video transitioned to a clip from the court hearing, where the judge clearly stated that Lucy was a fully competent adult who had refused to seek employment or professional therapy. And finally, the screen showed the bank statements of Lucy's inheritance account, showing how she had squandered hundreds of thousands of dollars on luxury brands, while I had lived in a student dorm and worked part-time to support myself. Lucy's face drained of color. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes darting around the crowd. The sympathetic whispers had turned into jeers and mocking laughter. No, no, that's not true, she screamed, her voice cracking. She edited those. She's lying. I'm the sensitive one. I'm the victim. You're not sensitive, Lucy, I said, my voice echoing clearly over the microphone. You're a parasite. You used our parents' guilt to consume their lives, and then you tried to consume mine. But I am not our parents. I don't care if you cry. I don't care if you starve. Your tears have no power here. Lucy looked at the crowd. Every single phone was pointed at her, but this time the internet wouldn't be on her side. The evidence was too clear, too overwhelming. She let out a strangled, pathetic sound, not a cry, but a whimper of absolute defeat. She turned and ran, tripping over her own stained coat, disappearing into the city streets like a ghost. 5 years later, the morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my spacious apartment, casting a warm, golden glow over the clean, minimalist living room. I stood by the kitchen island, sipping a cup of freshly brewed coffee. My life was peaceful. I had been promoted to vice president of my firm. I was healthy, active, and surrounded by people who respected me for who I was, not what I could sacrifice for them. Once a year, I received a court-mandated update regarding Lucy. She had finally been admitted to a state-run psychiatric facility. Not because she was sensitive, but because her severe personality disorder, left untreated, and enabled for 20 years, had made it impossible for her to function in civilized society. Without anyone to enable her, she had finally been forced to face reality. In the facility, she was just another patient. There were no special rooms for her plushies. There were no exceptions made for her meals. The nurses didn't comfort her when she cried, they simply marked it down as behavioral instability and adjusted her medication. I was told she had stopped crying. She had realized, in the most brutal way possible, that tears only work when there is someone who cares enough to dry them. When she was alone in a room of white walls, her tears were nothing more than salty water. I took a deep breath, feeling the cool air fill my lungs completely. In my previous life, I had died in pain, filled with regret, staring at the ceiling of a dark, cramped room, wondering why I had been born to suffer. But in this life, I looked out at the sprawling city skyline, the world wide open and bright. Before me, I had fought. I had bled. I had used my fists, my mind, and my relentless will to tear down the walls of my prison. I smiled, a quiet, humble, and deeply satisfied smile. The battle was over. And I had won.